So, hello, welcome to my PG-rated presentation. If my understanding of the PG rating system is correct, it means I get to drop one F-bomb at some point during this presentation, so I'll keep you on your toes for when that's going to be. So, good evening, everyone. My name's Thomas Harrison. I'm a partnerships manager at BSI, the British Standards Institution. So firstly, thank you all for coming today, and thank you as well to the team for allowing us to come along and speak. The ISO 27001 is one of the most kind of key, influential and important standards that we work with here in BSI, and it's recently undergone a pretty major revision. So back in 2022, a new version of the standard was released. So we're kind of doing our own little sort of roadshow to try and talk to as many people as we possibly can about A, what's changed, and kind of the benefits of using the new and latest version of the standard. So just before I kind of go too much into the presentation, can I get a quick show of hands of who in the audience has implemented ISO 27001 in their current company? Okay, cool. So a couple of people in the audience are familiar with the standard, which is good. So what I'll do is I'll give a bit of an overview of the standard, the background, and kind of what it's about and what it's for. And then my colleague Shirley, she's going to kind of run through a bit more about the changes between the two versions of the standard that kind of you probably most recently implemented in your organisation. So I'll give a bit of background of who BSI are, what we do, what cybersecurity governance is, how ISO 27001 cybersecurity governance kind of link together to drive improvements for business. So, who are BSI? So BSI stands for the British Standards Institution. We are the UK's national standards body. So what that means is we write and publish British standards. We represent the UK at the international level on ISO committees as well. But what we don't do is we don't determine when standards should be created or actually what goes into them. Standards are a mechanism and a tool for business for solving problems that industry faces. So back in the 1990s, UK government came to us and said one of the biggest threats that they could see coming on the future landscape was actually about attacks to information security and information technology. So they put together some sponsorship funds to create the world's first standard for managing the risks of information technology. This had some real successful uptake here in the UK, and then what we did at BSI was we took that standard to the international community and said, what we think we've got here in the UK, what's been created by UK thought leaders and people in industry like yourselves, we think it's actually some of the best kind of examples of its work in the world, and actually the international community agreed, and it was uptaken as an international standard where it got its number of ISO 27001. And we've actually been doing this for a long time. So it's about 125 years or so that BSI has been existed. We've done things from, we started our lives in tram tracks, screws, nails, technical specifications, you name it. And now we're looking at things like IoT security, as was mentioned earlier. So we've actually been influential in creating some of the standards that actually work as the baseline for the the IoT requirements that are going to be coming into place for anyone who wants to put an IoT product onto the market, and it helps kind of protect consumers as well. The Tower Bridge isn't just an example of Britishness. We actually trace our history back to a guy called John Wolfe Barry, who founded us back in 1901, and he was actually also the architect behind Tower Bridge. So, what is cybersecurity governance? So, out of the people in the audience who are probably familiar with cybersecurity, you might be thinking more, when we say cybersecurity, you think about things like firewalls, passwords, penetration testing, that sort of stuff. Cybersecurity governance is something slightly different. So what cybersecurity governance is looking at is more about the framework, processes and policies that an organization has in place for how do you manage your cybersecurity risks that you're going to be facing, and also your mitigation processes that you're going to be putting in place. And it's actually looking at kind of a holistic overall strategy for kind of how an organization should be operating. And how do we sort of take the context of what we would call the context of an organization, which is each and every different situation you guys all find yourself in, and how do we create something that's going to work for you? Because there's a lot of people in the room today, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different companies, and one set of solutions for one organization might not necessarily work for another organization. One of the other things to probably briefly touch upon is the difference between data privacy and data security. Probably a bit simplistic for the people in the audience here today, But obviously with things like the GDPR that came in a fair few years ago, most of the information security managers I've spoken to ended up with privacy kind of lumped onto their lap based on, oh, this is computers, you're the computer people, I'm sure you guys can deal with this as well. But anyone who has had to obviously implement any of the GDPR requirements knows that whilst there's a lot of crossover and similarities, these kind of concepts they're more cousins rather than they are brothers and sisters. Data privacy is looking at kind of how we use the information. I think we've got a talk coming later on this evening all about privacy, so I won't go too much detail about that. Data security is looking at things like how do we maintain the confidentiality of our information, how do we make sure our information doesn't degrade over time, and actually how we make sure we've got access to that information when we need it and at this kind of speed and rates of which we need it. And there's a lot of concepts of information security governance, but actually there's some three kind of key ones that I've pulled out here that are pretty much applicable to all organizations. So the first one is taking a risk-based approach. As I mentioned before, all of our organizations are different, our solutions are going to look different. So the good place to start is actually saying, what are the risks that we face as an organization? And those risks can come in different forms. Obviously, what kind of data are we hosting? Is it personal information? Is it medical records? Is it ListX sort of facility, top secret documents that would cause international outrage if they were released? What sort of organization are we? Are we the kind of organization that is going to slip under the radar, no one ever knows that we exist? Are we a critical part of the defense supply chain? And actually the threat of nation state actors is a real serious threat for us. Or are we operating in potentially a controversial industry where the risks of, say, hacktivists or people operating as lone operators might want to have a go at us just to take us down a peg. Policies and procedures. Obviously, what we want to be taking a look at here is things that are proportional to us as organizations. Small businesses, sometimes when they look at things like ISO 27001, instantly shut off because they say, it's not for us, this is for large organizations, we don't have the capacity to deal with it. And actually, it's not necessarily true. What ISO 27001 has to do is create proportional policies and procedures that work for you as an organization. And then leadership involvement as well. What we cannot possibly be having is all our information security people over on here saying one thing and then our senior leadership over here saying something different. What ISO 27001 says is actually the objectives for the management system needs to come from the same people who are setting the objectives for the business. So we can't have senior leaders saying we're going to triple the size of the business and we're also going to halve the size of the information security budget. That's just not going to work. And here are kind of a few more components of ISO 27001. As I mentioned, budget and resourcing is quite a critical one. So if you do want to ever implement an ISO 27001 system, senior leaders do need to be giving the resources to actually maintain and manage it. Doesn't necessarily need to be financial resources, although obviously that helps. Sometimes time is one of the critical components. Not just the time of the information security people, but the time of the leadership team themselves. As I mentioned before, they're going to have to set those objectives. They're going to have to be involved in the reviews and making sure that the organization is performing and behaving and going in the direction that they want it to be going. There's a few more ones in there as well. So many things like security KPIs, baseline metrics. A lot of what ISO 27001 is asking you to do is review previous incidents. So making sure you've got the ability to measure what has happened before, see if it's effective, and then do root cause analysis of it, saying what was the result of that, what incident led to that incident necessarily happening. Obvious, sometimes the first thing that you kind of come up with might not necessarily be the actual reason why something's happened. Just because one person has caused an issue, is it related to training, is it related to recruitment, is it related to access control? There's a lot of investigation that can kind of be put in place that can really help you get under the skin and understand what the problems that your organization are facing actually are. And the one we've got down at the bottom there is a concept we call continual improvement. And if you've ever implemented a management system before, whether it's ISO 27001, ISO 9001, 14001, the quality management, environmental management systems, you may possibly have come across this concept before, which has got a few names. So continual improvement, the Deming cycle, or plan, do, check, act is kind of what it's most commonly known as. So what the standard will guide you through is putting a framework in place for essentially how do you create this system within your business. So how do you create plans that are going to obviously align with those objectives that your senior leaders have put in place for the organization? How are you going to execute those plans using the resourcing and the budgeting that you've got available? what methods are you going to put in place for checking that the plans that you've actually have done have been effective? Have they achieved the objectives that they wanted to? Have they overachieved? Have they underachieved? Why might that have been the case? And then putting actions in place to either correct issues that might have occurred previously or learn from those learnings. So whether they're the good learnings, the bad learnings, how do you take all that information that your organization is producing and then feed it back into the plans so that every time that you're doing a new cycle of this, you're getting better and better over time. And as I mentioned, this is a concept that's kind of familiar in quite a few standards. So ISO 27001 is a really good framework for starting with an information security management system, but there are other standards out there that can kind of guide you in the direction of how do you start looking at taking this system and applying it to different areas. So we got 27017 and 18, look specifically at the threats that are being posed by cloud security and cloud privacy. And we've got ISO 27701, which is looking at how do you take your, what might be an information security management system, but how do you put a privacy spin on it so that you're going to take into account all those things that you're going to have from the GDPR or the DPA or the DPD. And there's and what you can also do with ISO 27001, I should say, is you can actually be certified to the standard. So auditors, whether it's from BSI or other certification bodies, we can come in, we can independently assess your system for how it's performing, and we can see if it's conforming or not conforming with the standard. And there's a whole audit schedule you can go through, and upon successfully passing it, you can get yourself certified to ISO 27001. One of the main reasons for doing it is to be able to demonstrate compliance with internationally recognized best practice. Obviously, it's a nice thing to have on websites, headers, footers, banners, web pages, all that sort of stuff. But we know that kind of one of the main drivers for it is how do you demonstrate compliance if you're responding to tenders, PQQs, any of your sort of supply chain requirements. If you're looking to get onto government frameworks like G-Cloud, that sort of thing, obviously these certifications can come up quite a lot. The high-level structure of ISO 27001, it's not just, obviously, like, takes into account all information security, so it's not just cyber security. What we're actually looking at as well is the information security for physical items. So it's lovely and dark outside, and over Christmas, one of my favourite hobbies is walking past offices and looking in the window and seeing how often you can see the phrase 2024 strategic plan written on a whiteboard through the window. Yeah, ISO 27001 takes those sorts of things into consideration. Your physical information is just as critical as your cyber information. And as I mentioned before, by getting yourself certified to ISO 27001, you can demonstrate compliance with best practice. And that's useful for tenders and that sort of thing as well. One of the main drivers for people getting certification. So just as a bit of a summary of the whole thing, if you've got a well-established context of your organization, as if you understand all the threats that are being posed to you externally and what the kind of the risks that you've got as information internally, and you can create nice, effective plans that work for you, work for your level of resourcing that you've got available and your time and your objectives, it can help you transform into a proactive organization. So you're not having to rely on incidents happening before you deal with them. It allows you to preempt them, see what's coming in the future, and cut them off at the pass before they actually lead to incidents that might negatively affect you as an organization. And it'll then allow you to continually improve your information security performance going forward. And on the subject of continual improvement, standards also don't stay the same. So what they do is they get updated on a fairly regular cycle. So I will hand over to my colleague Shirley at this point. So Shirley's one of our technical experts for 27001, who's been leading us kind of through the transition. So I will I'll hand over to her for the technical difficult parts of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Imagine for a moment an alternative universe, one where your most precious and important data remains secure, where you do not live in fear of ransomware or phishing or security breaches, where you could leave your PCs unlocked, where you're not forced to implement the most complex passwords for access to your own data, where you can just frolic in the fields maybe. The reality is a world does not exist like this. But just for a moment, imagine. Until then, the stark reality is we need good framework and governance processes in place to manage our cybersecurity needs. Businesses must ensure they have processes in place to protect themselves from both risks and security threats. My name is Shirley Redwood. I am the Technical Delivery Manager for the UK and Ireland team. I'm proud to support businesses on their security management journey. My background is 20 years in IT and information security management, and I manage a great team of client managers at BSI who are tasked with ensuring that the management systems adhere to and implement good security practices. Okay. So, let's take a look at the changes in the new standard. What are those areas of change? As Thomas alluded to, the standard no longer just relates to information security. It is now information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. Other key changes are within the high-level structure, meaning more well-defined clauses. There's been a harmonisation of changes which offer that consistency across all the ISO standards. There have also been some editorial changes as well for alignment of those terms and definitions. For example, control purpose replaces control objective. The standards, as Thomas mentioned, are regularly reviewed and they are revised to remain relevant. The new standard has received a significant update as part of this process. I'm sure you're all aware the last one was 2013, so long overdue. And these most recent updates, they reflect the latest security trends and technologies and best practices out there. And these changes have been made to ensure that the standard is even more relevant and to address those security threats and those technologies. It also ensures that all information is in one place and in all forms, including your paper-based, which I know is strange, not many people use paper anymore, and it's mainly your cloud-based, your digital data. It's a holistic approach to ISO 27001-22, and it means that all client operations and processes are protected, not just IT. It also ensures that client-wide protection against technology-based risks and other threats. And most importantly, it protects against that integrity, confidentiality, and availability of data. It also increases resilience to those cyber attacks. So this brings with it efficiency, reputation, and cost. These are things that we need to bear in mind. So re-efficiency, it enables businesses to respond quickly to evolving security threats. It helps clients improve that business process by identifying and addressing information security risks. From a reputational perspective, it demonstrates that clients take information security and cybersecurity seriously, and that they implement the best practices for their data, to protect their data. From a cost perspective, it can reduce the risk of fines, penalties for non-compliance, and reduce security breaches. It reduces IT costs, and also ineffective spending on defense technology as well. And it can lead to that improved productivity and those reduced costs. Other key areas of change are outlined on this slide. We can see that the information management system under 4.4 has changed. We now take into consideration processes needed and their interactions, and this has to be documented. This is one of the significant changes that have been made. It ensures three elements: that interested parties and their needs and expectations are considered, how governance should be established, and how governance processes should interact in terms of service delivery. It needs to meet the requirements of customers, your data subjects, your supply chains, regulators, legislators as well. So let's think about this from an information security perspective. We need to address the following elements: your business strategy, your contractual obligations, your operational KPIs, and your adherence to laws. We can then use this to confirm and establish our information security management system scope. This includes your internal and external issues. We can then use this information for privacy risks, opportunities that may impact the business as well. And then we can then build these requirements into our management system. Next, we have the clauses 4 to 10. Having these new controls in place will enable the business to readily evaluate the performance by monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of the management system. It provides the ability to review performance results, identify trends, and prioritize both reactive and proactive measures moving forward. Wherever you are in the process, you should always be able to identify that leadership influence and evidence of that regular communication. These are integral to the success of any successful implementation of ISO 27001. So this can be defined as follows. Documented meetings, for instance. We would expect to see management reviews regularly conducted. Communication plans. How are you getting that message out there? How are you ensuring that your staff, your team are aware of their obligations? Training and awareness. Once again, what to do if something happens. Is there a criteria? Is there a process to follow? The resource and planning and capacity. This would be your human resources. It would be your technical and financial teams. And there's also information and privacy risk. Breaches and vulnerability detecting as well. And then the reporting and the analysing of that. How are you doing? How are you processing that information? Are you improving? It all feeds back into that whole continual improvement process. Another new clause is 6.3, and that is the planning of changes. So this aligns to the management standard and demonstrates further examples of that harmonisation. These are things that we need to see happening, and I think it's just been more clearly defined than it ever has been. Then we have 8.1. Operational planning and control. Once you define the process and interactions as set out in Clause 4, we need to establish risk. We need to think about the actions around your statement of applicability, the controls you have in place, the definition of your risk framework. The following criteria can be considered. How the process is to be managed and measured, for instance. What are the risks associated with these processes? Which statement of applicability controls are in place to support these processes and mitigate the risks? And how the process is controlled and the outputs of these processes. These are all crucial. Risk is at the very heart of information security management. And we should also not forget those internal and external processes as well, which need to always be taken into consideration. Okay, so updates to the new Annex A control structure. There's a lot of information on this screen I'm mindful of, so I'll leave it up for a little while. So they're outlined on the slide. So there are 4 new categories. So it's been broken down into organisational, people, physical, and technical controls. These are further supported by 93 controls. And the layout for each control contains the following information. So we have to think about control types. So these are your preventative, your detective, your corrective actions. And then we have information security properties. This is all around your confidentiality, your integrity, your availability. We also have those cybersecurity concepts as well, to identify, to protect, detect, respond, recover. And the operational capabilities. This is around your asset management, your human resources, physical security, threats and vulnerabilities. And also things like your continual business continuity or your supplier or compliance. There's also the security domains, and this is around the governance, the ecosystem. So this is the protection, the defense, and the resilience. Okay, so from this slide, we can see that 58 controls have been maintained. And for example, we've highlighted people controls. So for instance, it used to be teleworking, which is a very sort of out-of-date phrase, very old-fashioned. So it's now remote working, and that's under Annex A Control 6.7. So yes, much better, even though it's a little bit late. Okay. We have physical controls as well. Security of equipment and assets off-prem, Annex A 11.2.6, is now referred to as the security of assets off-prem, and that is now Annex A Control 7.9. There are some merge controls as well. This has been it's been introduced maybe to deal with the streamlining of that new standard. I suppose it's been noted in the previous editions that certain controls were inseparable or so closely aligned in an organisation, you could not implement one without the other. So what we've done here, or what we're striving to do here, is look at the information security 5.1.1, for instance, and the 8.1.2. These have been merged into the new standard as 8.5.1, and the rationale behind this is to ensure effective implementation of specific policies. And hopefully it makes it that much clearer and easier to implement for an organisation. And this means that an organisation is able to review those policies at planned intervals and to ensure they still remain fit for purpose, and that changes are updated on a regular basis. Some more examples of merged controls. 8.5.1, policies and topic-specific policies shall be defined. And in 8.5.8, information security shall be integrated into project management. Here is another example of how the controls in the old standard have been merged and reworded. So we have here the authentication information and access rights. The standard also introduces 11 new controls. These range from threat intelligence, ICT readiness, business continuity, and data masking and leakage prevention as examples. So let's take this opportunity to look at one of the new elements of the standard, threat intelligence. An organisation needs to be aware of that threat environment and consider where threats may originate. Collected intelligence from strategic, tactical, and operational perspectives allows an organisation to present a layered response and to reduce the impact of such threats. Any intelligence that is gathered will be timely. There is an expectation. It should also provide awareness of 3 key areas: how the threat landscape is changing, different attacker methodologies and tools and technologies out there, and details of specific attacks. All this must be in relation to the organisation's own context and as to how it seeks to manage and to instigate a response. As well as addressing the external threats, an organisation should continually seek to look inwards. It would be easy to establish a strategy which includes KPIs for 0 risks, incidents and fines. An element of pragmatism is required. What can be established is a level of risk appetite where an organisation can still operate effectively and in a manner which is sustainable and meets the legal and contractual requirements. Hopefully, with such processes in place, we will one day maybe frolic through those information and cybersecurity fields. Thank you for your attention.
Great, so thank you all for listening to the talk. If you would like any more information at all, there's a URL, I think we're going to send the slides around as well. That QR code will take you to the same URL that's on the webpage. There's a lot of information there about transition guides, self-assessment checklists, all that sort of stuff. Myself and Shirley will be hanging around as well to sort of answer any questions, and have anyone got anything they want to say, please feel free to come grab us and we'll happily see what we can do to help. So yeah, thank you all very much for your time. Thank you.